mic to your ear. The Calitraveler Podcast Show is here. Created on Anchor.fm and distributed worldwide on various listening platforms. This is the Calitraveler Podcast Show. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 3 of the Calitraveler Podcast Show. This week's episode, we will be discussing the unfortunate tragedy that unfolded on October 21st, 2021 during the film production of upcoming Western film Rust, starring Alec Baldwin. Many of you have heard of Alec Baldwin, or at least one of his brothers, William, Stephen, and Daniel. Alec Baldwin's film credits include Adam Maitland in Beetlejuice, Jack Ryan in The Hunt for Red October, Dennis the Bounty Hunter in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, The Boss Baby in The Boss Baby, and Jack Donaghy in the NBC sitcom 30 Rock. The current project that Alec Baldwin is working on is a Western genre film called Rust. The story of Rust takes place in Kansas in the 1880s. The story was written by Alec Baldwin and Joel Souza. Alec Baldwin stars and produces the film. Joel Souza is the director of Rust. Halyna Hutchins is a cinematographer. On October 21st, 2021, a tragedy occurred at the Bonanza Creek Ranch in Bonanza Creek, New Mexico during the production of the film Rust, involving Alec Baldwin, director Joel Souza, and cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. During the production, Alec Baldwin's character fires a prop gun that was thought to have been loaded with blanks instead of live ammunition. For those of you that don't know about guns, I will explain to you the differences between blanks and live ammunition. Blanks are used in the film industry to imitate live ammunition. The reason they are so convincing is the effects they produce are essentially real. While the term bullet is commonly used to describe what is loaded into weapons, more properly, it is a cartridge that is loaded, a self-contained ammunition package made up of a casing holding an explosive powder known as the primer. When fired, it blasts out a projectile or bullet. Blanks consist of a primer and a casing, but don't contain a projectile. Live ammunition contains everything a blank has, but includes a projectile which leaves the barrel of the gun when fired. When Alec Baldwin had fired the gun, it had unknowingly been loaded with a live round. This caused the accidental shooting death of Rust cinematographer Halyna Hutchins and seriously injured director Joel Souza. Before the tragedy had occurred, assistant director Dave Halls had called out, "Cold gun!" before filming was to take place. Cold gun is a term used for notifying cast and crew that the film's prop guns are not loaded. The incident is still under investigation by the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Department. This incident has been widely compared to the 1993 accidental shooting death of Brandon Lee, son of the legendary Bruce Lee, during filming of The Crow. In the Brandon Lee incident, the gun had been loaded with dummy cartridges instead of blanks to give the close-up shot of the gun a more realistic effect. The film crew had purchased live rounds of ammunition and removed the primer to create the dummy rounds. The primer had been left intact. Blanks had been placed into the gun, but beforehand, one of the dummy rounds had been fired and the bullet became lodged in the barrel of the gun. When actor Michael Massey's character fired at Brandon Lee's character, the bullet that had been lodged in the barrel left the gun and entered Brandon Lee's abdomen. Sadly, Brandon Lee passed away at the age of 28 after 6 hours of surgery. As tragic as both of these situations are, many questions are being asked about what could have been done to prevent these tragedies from occurring and what can be done to ensure that this will never happen again. In this episode, we will be talking with 3 film creators about the tragedy. Joining the discussion are Talia Sourkes, film creator and photographer and graduate from the University of San Francisco with a bachelor's degree in media studies. Arizona-based film producer Christian Meza and returning guest Tyler G Wida. You remember Tyler as Hynmay Productions, film creator and Tik Tok star. Joining us on the Calitraveler Podcast Show is Talia Sourkes. How are you?
What's up? Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So would you like to give us a little bit of background of your experience in the film industry?
Okay, so I majored in media studies over at the University of San Francisco. Did a couple of multimedia classes in high school, photography classes here and there, and just love running around with the camera.
I live here in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm the CEO and director of 2 independent film production companies here. One of them I started in high school, actually, as a joke. Later turned out to be my main occupation. It's called Christian Meza Media, and later on throughout this year, I actually started my second production company, which is called Exothermic Films. I thought I'd pay a little homage to some of the chemistry courses I've taken in college. And a lot of my work revolves around commercial cinematography. I do a lot of work in the automobile industry. I've done a lot of work here locally for commercial-based productions, short film work, particularly recently, tons of Westerns, actually. And I think it's one of the few occupations that's so spoken about specifically right now due to the event that you had just mentioned just recently. Photographer, I've done a lot of work as a voice actor. You may know me as voice for Kia. Every once in a while you might hear a little voice for the Kia Sorento, and you'll be like, that guy sounds a bit familiar, so I'm that guy every once in a while. But I like to dip my fingers in a whole bunch of things to keep me occupied, keeps me out of trouble.
Joining us on the Calitraveler Podcast Show is returning guest Tyler G Wida.
So for myself, I graduated from the University of Arizona with my film and television degree. I graduated magna cum laude with a proficiency in cinematography. I've been doing professional videography and photography over in Tucson, Arizona for a little more than a decade now, and I've been able to do everything from weddings, music videos, short films, etc.
In this week's episode of the Calitraveler Podcast Show, we'll be talking about the unfortunate tragedy that took place on the movie set of Rust. Where do you, as a film creator, feel the production went wrong?
I think there are different steps that were missed. Not having people check the gun, whether it was like a loaded gun, cold gun, or whatever. There's that, but also I think not maybe having an experienced person. What's a person called, like, who watches the armorer? I think.
Yeah, it would be the armorer.
Not having an experienced person on site, or at least having an experienced person like paired with the armor that they had mishap, where it's like, if there's public knowledge of someone saying, I'm not experienced, I feel like if you're going to hire that person, at least have an experienced or a senior person working with them so they can have an extra set of eyes, or like someone there who can ask, or someone can be like, hey, I don't know if I'm doing this correctly, can you check? But also I think it falls on the producers too, to be sure someone is checking at every step and to know who is in charge of a loaded gun at any given time. I think there are multiple steps from producers to security, if there was security, but also planning of where a gun will be and if it's loaded or not loaded, who's in charge of it, where it's at any given time, that kind of stuff. And it seems like every step was missed, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So,
we're kind of looking at it like an onion. We're noticing that there may have been some responsibility from multiple parties. Some people might have had a bigger role than we might have anticipated they might have originally had from this particular perspective. It's a lot of things to take into consideration, especially since productions work a lot like this sometimes. In a lot of these modern productions that I work with, I do a lot of work in Western films recently. Somehow found myself diving into numerous Western films here in Southern Arizona, particularly Tombstone. And there is a very important culture around ensuring the safety of others while we're filming, especially with potential rounds that go into the weapons that we use on screen. And normally we say, okay, this is the job for the armorer or our weapons specialist, and they take care of it, and you always feel really confident. I've never ever had any problems with that on set before, and if ever there is, it's always going to be handled by our safety officer or whoever is managing our unit production, and that's usually about where it ends. Everybody else has their own designated job during productions, but it's tricky to decide specifically where in the filming of Rust who is perfectly at fault in here, because there's a lot of different stories starting to come up and a lot of different pointing, and I don't think we'll be able to have a definitive moral compass as far as deciding that for a while, because it looks like there was already a lot of, I guess you could say, a spaghetti of confusion to begin with this production, because apparently the original crew was ultimately compromised. Their weapons specialists didn't know what they were doing and ultimately ended up going to the responsibility of a director, apparently. So there's no clear identification for it yet, and that's a huge problem that needs to be addressed.
So for this specific instance, what happened is that there was a miscommunication from what I've seen of the prop master, and I believe it was prop master who unfortunately did not check the firearm to make sure that it was unloaded and that it was not an actual firearm. Because even prop masters should be able to have an indication of it being a unloaded firearm. So I believe that is where it's wrong for this individual production.
Do you feel there could have been room for improvement during the production of Rust? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I think everywhere there could be room for improvement. If cast members and crew members are expressing concern about safety, I think production kind of has to listen to that. If there are multiple people saying, hey, I don't feel safe, you kind of have to be like, yo, let's actually listen to this. And the fact that people quit just days before this happened, it's kind of a like, guys, what are you doing? I think improvement could have been done there. I think improvement could have been done with everyone. I feel like everyone could have done better on safety, listening to staff, because whether you're an actor or producer or director or whatever, you're part of a team. And if a team isn't communicating, you're going to have instances like this. And it's unfortunate that this happened.
There was, according to various sources that have been found online, and it'll take a lot of cross-referencing in order to validate everything here. There were a lot of corners that were being cut. In some forms of film, you have to understand that there are going to be some compromises that you're going to have to make on set. There are times where sometimes catering doesn't work out, or maybe hotels don't exactly work out. In case of Rust, that was also a problem for some of the original production. There are some that were either incongruent that happened on set that you just kind of have to get around and say, I guess we're sleeping under the stars tonight, or, we're not going to be able to get this done today. And that's to be expected every once in a while. Things aren't always going to be working as well as you envision them to be from the start. That's kind of a bit of an axiom whenever you're working on these kinds of productions. But when it comes to safety on a set and ensuring that everybody has just general safety, there's no compromises that you should be able to make with that. And I think it starts to kind of osmose, or it starts to kind of transmogrify with the rest of the culture that we can just whatever happens on set, we'll just have to make up for it, or we'll just have to play it by ear. But you absolutely must do everything within your power to ensure that you are completely safe, especially with live fire. If you're working with pyrotechnics, dangerous animals, safety is absolutely everything. And it's unfortunate that this has happened, because this isn't a unique story, and this has happened plenty of times before.
Yes, so making sure to have the prop master be qualified and making sure that they are able to safely check any type of firearms that are put onto on set. Even when I've worked on other productions that have used live firearms as well, they've all been done with a prop master who has had experience in using it and making sure that it is checked before any actor and or team member is ever a part of it. So I believe that safety measurements from the prop master would be better, also making sure to indicate actors and actors to also check the firearms themselves.
How do you think Halyna Hutchins' death will impact the film industry?
There will be more safety precautions being implemented. Realization of we can't use prop guns on the set anymore will be changed. I mean, I just think safety in terms of like using live ammunition, is that whatever? I think that will change a lot. Anytime you have a loaded gun on set, whether it's with a blank or an actual bullet, it's a safety issue. And now that this happened, I think probably change. I mean, you can do so much now with technology in today's day and age. You can have a gun on set, just don't have the bullets, and you can do all the special effects in post. I think that would be the biggest thing, is safety aspect of it. Someone died, this is the steps we need to do to change it. Probably the biggest one would be safety. And
I might need a second to think about this here. Halyna Hutchins was, as I remember her, a very innocent, honest, and eyes to the sky kind of person at a mixer over in Los Gatos, California, while we were doing, I guess you can say, like a meet in Netflix headquarters. And we did a bunch of group photos with this Instagram group who decided to come by, and I don't remember who it was, but I think it was like female filmmakers or something like that. And apparently she was one of the few people who was in attendance. And I remember her from a particular photo that a friend sent of mine. He's like, you 100% met her while we were over there. And it's a challenging thing to kind of accept whenever you notice that good talent like that who was on the rise isn't going to be able to make it through what was ultimately deterministically going to be one of the most prodigious careers, especially in the area of women in filmmakers, which is such a huge, powerful movement right now, and is something that we are all adopting heavily. It's sad to think that such a tiny, simple little accident completely ended her career. And a very tricky way to say this, but it's a very interesting thing that someone of a notable character like Alec Baldwin is responsible for this, because I think in many cases, stuff like this might be brushed under the rug a little bit and just say, well, this stuff happens and stuff. And it's an absolute tragedy. And it needs to be taken care of with the utmost sense of urgency and immediate change, which I'm going to say adamantly that I don't think there's going to be incredibly large amount of change here. This is a long points of conversation about it, but she is going to ultimately be the catalyst for asking questions. There are some things that have happened within Hollywood besides this, and things that are not exactly revolved around safety that we brought up as a point of conversation, whether it was the whole Harvey Weinstein thing or instances of embezzlement that have happened in the past that had people talking. And it was very important that we had people talking. So we had a movement to be able to say, this needs to stop, or we need to make some kind of a change here. You referenced earlier, having Alec Baldwin kind of as a face of this incident is very symbolic, because now people are going to be talking about this character that people know. And we saw photos of him where he was in tremendous grief. And we have this innocent person who was gone by a live weapon fire, which in America right now is already an existing question of politics. It's getting people talking already. A bunch of coal was suddenly thrown into the fire. And what's ultimately going to lead from this is people are ultimately going to start asking, are we going to continue using real guns? Are we going to continue using blanks? And in fact, this was the question that happened on a few different sets that I've been working on already. Unfortunately, some of them have NDAs, so I can't really speak too much about them. But we've had conversations with our safety officers and visors, as well as our armors and weapons specialists. Do we use live fire? And I can talk about some of the results of that in a little bit, but the question is starting to become answered, and it's leading to more steps of inquiry, like, should we be using real guns? Is there alternatives? What is a good use of CGI in this particular film that we're going to be shooting? Can we do it? Because now we see that even on a film where Alec Baldwin, this Hollywood star, this Hollywood hero, even accidents at that level still happen. As I mentioned before, there was already an inherent problem with production, given the fact that some of the staff was mistreated, some of concerns weren't addressed. And it's duly a problem about a situation of safety, as well as Hollywood culture right now, and a form of toxicity that can exist. And we are now a bit more aware of it. I feel having that continue as an act of inertia to keep it rolling and moving is going to be the question forward, and bigger inquiry is still going to continue.
Right now, I've definitely seen lots of backlash from the media industry calling for no more real firearms. There's also many people who are asking for qualified individuals as well. Personally, I don't believe that eliminating real firearms on set will actually be a benefit, because there are still aspects of practical production that can be used for people to use live firearms, as long as they are done with respect to the firearm and the respect to the actors themselves, making sure that safety is priority for that, and making sure to move forward that people learn from mistakes and have people are going to be qualified individuals who can make sure to do that. How it will affect it, though, is that people have already declared that they are no longer going to be on any productions that use live firearms. So there are aspects of that. The only aspect of this that will be a downfall is the essence of realism and that disconnect, because when people use proper firearms and don't have a discharge, it can look corny and fake, especially if there is an inappropriate amount of recoil or no recoil at all for a firearm that's fired. Will it be safer? Yes, but it will also break the illusion of realism.
What would you as a film creator do to prevent a tragedy like this from occurring in the future?
For me personally, I think just having an open line of communication. I personally wouldn't use a prop gun. I might have one on set, but not have blanks or ammo anywhere on set. and figure out a way to have the gun go off in post. If there was a prop gun using blanks, the proper members of my team understand to have the proper person be in charge of the whole process of that. And then also just knowing where that gun is going and having people check it at every step of the way, from the time it leaves wherever it starts to the actor's hand. Because I feel like in Rust, there was a lot of missteps of who had the gun where and when and who checked what. It didn't seem like anyone was communicating with one another. It just didn't seem like anyone knew whether it was a loaded gun or a cold gun. And the difference between everyone knowing it and no one is honestly a life or death instance. So, and we've seen what can happen when no one communicates with anyone.
This is a tricky question, and I need to answer this honestly as a filmmaker who works within an industry that uses this kind of technology to create the image that we're after. I'll give you a few examples from some of the film sets I've been working on. I've been working on plenty of Westerns, as I keep mentioning recently, and only starting to scratch the surface of the technicalities of how to film Westerns. And while I have a cinematic eye for being able to collect color and understand the angles of what makes a really cool Western, there's still a lot of things that happen in the background that I'm not very aware of. And I'll say this to continue onward. I'm in no way a weapons expert and merely a DP who has had the honor of starting to learn how to operate within weaponry within film productions. I've had a few different productions that have happened in past. We have had plenty of blanks fired, and there is a very strong culture, as I may have mentioned before in Tombstone, about people having a strong regard for safety, as plenty of gunfighting shows happen there pretty much daily. And armors and weapons specialists of their own are always checking. And there's a sense of pride when it's done. And that's good. Being able to keep a sense of authenticity adds character. There's a reason that real weapons are used for them. And I don't want to necessarily discuss the mechanics, but from a standard perspective, you can have realistic authenticity whenever you're using actual weaponry. You can feel the kick, you can see the actual smoke, the propellant shoot out from it, and there's a sense of realness that comes to it that filmmaker we want to try to capture. It's crazy because the first time I'd ever been exposed to these blank rounds, they're incredibly loud and they startle you like crazy. You've watched some of the other Westerns I've done, especially the earlier ones. You may notice that while I'm actually filming, you'll notice there's like a little slight quake that I have ready to take the sounds of how loud these blank rounds are. And there is a sense of authenticity. You can see how people react to it. The communication between the gunfighter and whoever the victim would be is very real. And many of these times, it's these actors who are very well trained in gunfighting scenarios. And it's very, very cool to be able to work with them. I didn't know what I was doing for a long period of time. I just assumed that everything was going to be okay with them. While we were filming a recent film over in Gammons Gulch, which is, I believe, in Benson, Arizona, there was a part where a buddy of mine we had on set named Todd, and I said, all right, aim it right at the camera. And he said, I'm not going to aim it at the camera. I said, it's okay, look, trust me, because a lot of people don't know this, but it is still dangerous. It's like working with a lot of different sports that are out there. Bullfighting, working with bulls, working in intense situations of crazy sports. There is an aspect of danger to it, and it can be prevented. Danger can be prevented, and security can be ensured with someone who is very, very careful. And thanks, Todd, because he told me a little bit later, I'm sure it would have looked really, really cool, but, there's a lot of procedures to ensure that even filmmakers are taken care of. They have to ensure it's safe, and I appreciated that. And there was a kind of culture that I found from that very, very comforting. And in many ways, it both kind of relieved me, but it also kind of put me not on edge, but it kept me on my toes to kind of respect what it meant to have weapons on set and being able to use firing rounds, non-live blank rounds that actually gave the sense of authenticity with it. As I became a little bit more aware of it, the incident with Alec Baldwin on the set occurred. It shakes you to your core because you realize, as I mentioned previously, even on Hollywood level productions, you can see that accidents like these do occur, and various forms of culture that I've probably been privileged by. It sucks to see that something so good can be brought to its knees. It's something that we all as filmmakers need to address. So currently, I have about 4 or 5 upcoming different film projects that I'm going to be working with. One of them in particular with Amazon. And we had a long discussion recently about, are we using live rounds? Are we going to be using this kind of blank, or are we just going to be using CGI? And it's tough. There's a word that we use in the industry. It's called Verisimilit. One of our producers told that. And it's a very important concept that describes keeping authentic things real within production. If you show up to a Western film festival and clearly have some kind of a fake gun within your production, you will be ridiculed. That's immediately a question of culture and how we describe our form of little things throughout production that make things authentic and real and give the verge and the sense of blood rushing to the film. Because whenever you're in the midst of pulling out a gun for something, you see it all the time in Western film culture. Pulling out a gun, somebody's getting shot, and there's a strong divider between what is essentially a great film, which uses the effect gunplay and gunfighting very effectively, and using it to add power to a story. In many cases, I like to refer to one of my favorite movies, There Will Be Blood, I drink your milkshake, not necessarily that part. Some reference and look into gunfight in there, and it feels like it makes a strong addition to the story. Whereas in some films, they just say, all right, have this person get shot over here. This guy just, there's no sense of addition to the story itself. The questions I ask are, what are the benefits of having it? Are they really necessary? And can you afford to do something a bit more safely? I know there's a very heavy culture around of using realistic guns and continuing to do it. It's important for us to kind of understand the pros and cons of how to do it. And people need to be aware of the idea that it is still dangerous. You hear about people who own these exotic animals like tigers, bears, and stuff like that. And while many of the times they're safe animals, and it's just a Pookie's just a family bear. He wouldn't eat old Charlie. Charlie gets eaten at some point, or maybe he might not get eaten. Who knows? There have been cases of accidents where we think, it's potentially safe. Nothing can go wrong, and the illusion is immediately brought to its knees. On my sets from now on, and something that I've actively made aware to productions that I've been working on, is how can we better the safety for everybody? And it's one of these things that it's an obvious question. It's like, well, yeah, of course. What are we going to do to keep everyone safe? We need to have a conversation about, are we going to use actual live fire here? Are we going to be using these blanks to represent our story? Or is it something that we can just potentially avoid? It's an important question, and I don't have the answer for it yet. But the most important thing is a few things. One, Halyna's death could have been easily avoided. And there were basic steps that could have been done by it doesn't even have to necessarily be an armor. There are multiple steps that you can have throughout the production that ensures a safety of these rounds. The other thing that's for sure is that we're going to see change in how guns are being portrayed and used as far as movies. There's a reason why you see a squirt gun for the emoji on your iPhone these days instead of an actual live revolver. And these are the kinds of things that we are going to ultimately see as filmmakers. We're now...
Even for other films that I have used myself, where I have used live firearms myself, I make sure to go ahead and double check each individual firearm that I'm going to hand over. That's the cast member who understands that this is a real firearm, it is not to be played with, it should be treated with respect just like any other firearm. I also do this with the type of prop firearm, because even if you have something such as a BB gun, that can still shoot and hurt somebody if it is loaded with something, which of course they should not. So how I make sure to go ahead and do it is that whoever would be my props master, whether it be myself or somebody else who's qualified to do the tool, has that opportunity, they're going to be the ones who are going to put safety first. And that way people are not going to be hurt on it.
I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming onto the Calitraveler Podcast Show and sharing your experience in the film industry. May each and every one of you be in good health always, and I wish you all successes in your endeavors.